The graveyard has a sound, but you can only hear it when you're not listening. It's the groan of stressed metal cooling over a decade, the whisper of solar wind catching on a jagged piece of hull plating, the faint, percussive pop of micrometeoroids peppering the tombs of 10 million souls. We called it the Cygnus Graveyard, the final resting place of the human race, or so the rest of the galaxy believed. For 10 years, it had been my world, my sanctuary, and my prison. My name is Kyle, and I am a ghost who picks through the bones of his own civilization. Our home, the Wraith, was a Frankenstein's monster of a ship, a cobbled-together scavenger built from the guts of 3 different Navy corvettes. It was ugly, unreliable, and the only thing that kept the 4 of us from becoming frozen statues floating in the void. There was Anya, our pilot, a woman whose eyes held the same cold fire as the dying stars she navigated us through. She'd been a flight commander in the 5th Fleet, and she never talked about the day we lost, but you could see it in the way her hands gripped the controls, a permanent white-knuckled memory. Then there was Lena, our tech prodigy, a girl who was barely a woman, born on a carrier ship just a few years before the end. She saw circuits and data streams as a language, a forgotten tongue she was fluent in, coaxing life from dead machines with a patience that bordered on religious reverence. And, finally, there was Jax, who never spoke of his past at all. He was our muscle, our security, a mountain of quiet fury who moved with the chilling grace of a predator. He was the one who kept the other scavengers, the desperate and the mad, who also haunted this debris field, from thinking the Wraith was an easy meal. We lived by a simple code: we take what we need. We don't disturb the dead more than necessary. And we never, ever venture near the heart of the graveyard, the place where the flagship Vigilance lay, tangled in the corpse of the Xylosian Dreadnought it had died fighting. The ship was a monument, a tomb so sacred that even the most hardened among us gave it a wide berth. It was bad luck, a place where the ghosts were said to be thickest. But luck, like our supply of clean water and reactor fuel, was running out. We were low on everything, and the outer arms of the debris field had been picked clean over the years. Every accessible cargo bay had been breached, every functional power conduit stripped. The easy pickings were long gone, leaving only the dangerous jobs, the ones that required deep cuts into ships whose reactors were unstable or whose hulls groaned under the strain of a decade of decay. That's why the Vigilance had been whispering to me in my dreams. It was the prize, the one ship guaranteed to have intact systems, military-grade components, and a fully stocked medbay. Its command bridge was sealed with a dursteel blast door that no scavenger crew had ever managed to breach, and its reactor was in a state of cold shutdown, too stable to be a threat, but too complex for most to attempt a reboot. It was a time capsule of our species' last moments of glory. "We're going in," I told the crew, my voice flat in the recycled air of our small mess hall. Anya didn't look up from cleaning her sidearm, the methodical scrape of cloth on metal, the only sound. Lena's fork paused halfway to her mouth, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. Jax just continued to stare at the bulkhead, his expression unreadable, which was his only expression. "The Vigilance," Anya finally said, her voice laced with the gravel of disbelief. "We swore we wouldn't." "Kyle, it's a tomb." I projected a flickering schematic of the ship onto the table between us. "It's also a supply depot," I countered, tracing a line with my finger. "The command bridge is isolated. Naval protocol dictates that in the event of imminent destruction, the bridge is sealed to preserve the black box. The ship's log. 10 years of decompression haven't touched what's inside. Medical supplies, officers' rations, maybe even a functioning hydro garden. But most importantly, the data core. A complete record of humanity's last stand. The truth, for whatever that's worth now. That last part was for me. The official story, the one the Coalition broadcast before they sealed the Cygnus sector and declared it a memorial zone, was that humanity had fought a heroic, sacrificial battle against the silicates, a crystalline hive mind that threatened to pour through a collapsing warp gate. We held the line, they said, and saved the core worlds. A noble end for a species that had always been a little too aggressive, a little too ambitious for the Coalition's liking. But I had been there, a young ensign on the frigate Orion, and the memories didn't feel heroic. They felt like chaos, like a rout, like a betrayal I couldn't quite put my finger on. The approach to the Vigilance was silent and somber. The ship was magnificent even in death, a leviathan of shattered armor and gaping wounds. Its spinal cannon snapped in half like a broken bone. It was impaled on the crystalline superstructure of its enemy, locked in a deadly embrace. We docked the Wraith near the aft section, using magnetic clamps that groaned in protest. The journey through the ship's interior was a pilgrimage through a frozen hell. We moved through cavernous hangar bays where fighters still sat in their launch cradles, their pilots skeletal figures strapped into the cockpits. We navigated zero-G corridors where the bodies of the crew floated like forgotten constellations, their faces masks of surprise and terror, flash frozen in the instant the ship lost atmosphere. Every face was a reminder of what we'd lost, every compartment a testament to our extinction. It took us 8 hours to reach the command bridge blast door. It was as formidable as the legend said. A meter-thick slab of scarred metal that had withstood the battle that tore the rest of the ship apart. No way a plasma torch is getting through that, Anya stated, her voice tight over the comms. It's hardened against energy weapons. I turned to Lena, who was already running a diagnostic, her slender fingers dancing over a portable interface she'd connected to the door's control panel. The locking mechanism is hydraulic, powered by an auxiliary source, she murmured, more to herself than to us. If I can overload the pressure regulators, I might be able to force a manual release. But it'll be loud. Very loud. We had no choice. Jack set up a defensive perimeter, his pulse rifle scanning the dark, silent corridors for any rivals who might be drawn by the noise. I stood watch with him, my own rifle feeling heavy and useless against the crushing weight of the silence. The boom was concussive, a deep, resonant thud that vibrated through the deck plates and sent a cloud of frost and dust billowing down the hallway. It was followed by the screech of tortured metal as the colossal locks disengaged. With a final, shuddering sigh, a gap opened, just wide enough for us to squeeze through. The bridge was pristine, a bubble of preserved time. The emergency lighting cast a ghostly blue glow over the command stations, where officers still sat, slumped over their consoles. The air was frigid, and a thin layer of ice coated every surface, but the vacuum of space had kept decay at bay. At the center of it all, slumped in the captain's chair, was a figure in a dress uniform, Captain Eva Rostova, the last Grand Admiral of the human fleet. Her eyes were closed, her expression serene, as if she were merely sleeping. And in front of her, the main holoscreen was frozen on a single, terrifying image, the swirling chaos of the collapsing warp gate, filled with the crystalline shards of the silicate fleet. Lena moved with a quiet reverence, her touch gentle as she brushed the ice from the master console. "The data core is intact," she whispered, her breath fogging in the cold. Hardened casing protected it from the EMP that must have fried the rest of the ship. "I'm going to try and access the final log entries." The bridge hummed to life around us, ancient systems stirring from their long slumber. The main screen flickered, the frozen image of the battle dissolving into static before resolving into the calm, resolute face of Captain Rostova, recording her final log. Her voice, crisp and clear, filled the dead air of the bridge, a voice from a world that no longer existed. "Captain's log. Final entry," she began, her gaze unwavering. "The silicate fleet has broken our primary line. The warp gate is destabilizing faster than projected. We can't hold them." The screen split, showing tactical displays and frantic comms traffic. Then, a new face appeared, a high-ranking Xylosian officer, his reptilian features tight with stress. It was Admiral Vorlag, Supreme Commander of the Coalition Fleet. "Hold the line. Vigilance." His voice crackled, distorted by interference. "You must hold the gate until the core fleets have evacuated through the secondary corridor." Rostova's composure finally cracked. "Negative." "Admiral, that's a suicide run. My fleet is at 30% strength. We don't have the firepower to hold this position for more than a few minutes. We need to retreat with you." The Admiral's eyes narrowed. "Your orders are to hold." "Captain, that is the consensus of the Coalition Council. Your sacrifice will save trillions of lives." Sacrifice. The word hung in the air, cold and sharp. This wasn't a battle. It was an execution. But then came the final, most damning piece of the puzzle. A new voice patched through, overriding the Admiral's channel. It was a human voice, calm, authoritative, and utterly chilling in its resolve. On the screen, the insignia of the human high command flashed. In a face I recognized from 100 propaganda vids appeared Admiral Valerius Kane, the supposed hero who died alongside his people. Except he wasn't on the bridge of his own flagship. He was on a different ship. The background clean, sterile, and completely undamaged. "Ava, you have your orders," Kane said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Hold the line. The future of our species depends on it." A select flotilla, carrying the best and brightest of our people scientists, engineers, thinkers, is already en route to a classified relocation point. We will preserve the essence of humanity. Your fleet's sacrifice will give us the time we need to escape. Do your duty. The connection cut. Captain Rostova stared at the empty screen for a long moment, her face a mask of utter betrayal. Then, she looked directly into her log recorder, her eyes finding hours across a decade of silence and death. "He's leaving us," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Kane, he's leaving us all to die." The log ended there. The screen went black, plunging the bridge back into its ghostly blue twilight. The silence that followed was heavier, more profound than before. It was the silence of a truth so monstrous, it sucked all the air from the universe. We weren't heroes. We weren't a noble sacrifice. We were an obstacle, a speed bump, a necessary expenditure thrown away by our own leader to save a chosen few. The 10 million souls in this graveyard hadn't died fighting for humanity. They had been murdered by it. Anya was the first to move. She walked over to the frozen form of Captain Rostova and gently brushed the ice from the rank insignia on her collar. Lena was openly weeping, her small shoulders shaking as she slumped against a console. Jax, for the first time since I'd known him, looked at me, and in his dark eyes, I saw a reflection of the inferno that had just been lit in my own gut. The grief, the sorrow, the weary resignation that had been my constant companions for 10 years evaporated, burned away by a white-hot rage that was cleaner and purer than anything I had ever felt. We had been living in a graveyard, believing we were the last echoes of a noble story. But we were wrong. We were not the last. And the story was not over. I looked at the tactical map still faintly visible on a secondary screen, which showed the trajectory of Kane's escaping flotilla before the comms went dark. It was a ghost of a trail, a faint whisper, but it was a start. "Lena," I said, my voice a low growl I barely recognized. "Pull every scrap of data from that log. Comms frequencies, ship manifests, potential destinations, everything related to Kane's select flotilla." She nodded, her tears replaced by a new, hard light in her eyes as she furiously went to work. I turned to the others. "For 10 years, we've been ghosts, hiding in the dark, surviving on scraps. We accepted our fate because we thought our people died with honor." I looked around the bridge at the frozen faces of the men and women who had been thrown away. Their honor was stolen from them. We're going to get it back. Kane and Vorlag wanted the galaxy to think we were extinct. It's time we showed them how wrong they were. We're not just survivors anymore. We're consequences. Anya chambered around in her pistol, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent tomb. Jax drew the massive combat knife he always carried, the polished steel reflecting the cold. Blue light. A new purpose had settled over us. We were no longer scavengers. We were hunters. And the graveyard was no longer our prison. It was our armory. Lena looked up from the console, her face pale, but her voice steady. "I have something." A name from the cover-up logs. A Coalition logistics officer who signed off on the falsified casualty reports and the sealing of the Cygnus sector. A man named Zaylen Kor. According to this, he was granted an early, honorable retirement for his service. He's now the portmaster on a trading hub in the Outer Rim, a place called Port Noctis. I felt a grim smile touch my lips. It was a start, a thread to pull. We would unravel their perfect lie, one life at a time. I turned and walked towards the exit of the bridge, not bothering to look back. There was nothing for us here anymore but ghosts and a truth that demanded blood. "Anya, plot a course for Port Noctis." I ordered over the comm. "We're leaving the graveyard." The Wraith detached from the corpse of the Vigilance and turned its nose toward the living stars, a single spark of vengeance escaping a decade of darkness. We were the dead, and we were coming for them. The journey out of the Cygnus graveyard was like a slow, painful awakening. For 10 years, the only light we'd known was the cold, distant glitter of uncaring stars and the ghostly glow of dead reactors. Now, as the Wraith pushed into open space, the universe came alive with color and light we had almost forgotten. Nebulae bloomed like impossible flowers of gas and dust, and the raw, unfiltered glare of a nearby sun felt like a physical blow after a decade in the shadows. The silence on the ship was different now. It was no longer the hollow, grief-stricken quiet of survivors, but the dense, coiled silence of predators. Anya piloted with a newfound precision, her movements sharp and economical, her eyes fixed on the navigation charts as if they were battle plans. Lena had become a creature of the data core, her fingers a constant blur across her console, sifting through the mountains of information from the vigilance. She was building a web, connecting names, dates, and encrypted transmissions, her face illuminated by the cascade of stolen secrets. Jax spent his time in the small, makeshift armory, methodically stripping, cleaning, and reassembling every weapon we owned. The rhythmic click-clack of metal on metal was the new heartbeat of our ship, a steady, lethal pulse counting down to our first act of retribution. I watched them all, feeling the frayed edges of my own soul being pulled taut, woven into this new, singular purpose. The rage I felt was a clean and constant fire, a furnace that had burned away the last vestiges of the lost, grieving ensign I once was. In its place was something harder, something forged in the cold vacuum of betrayal. We were the last echoes of a murdered people, and we would make sure the galaxy heard our scream. Port Noctis hung in the void like a gaudy jewel, a sprawling station of interconnected rings and domes that pulsed with light and traffic. It was a chaotic hub of commerce and corruption, a place where 1,000 different species jostled for profit under the loosely enforced authority of the Coalition. Seeing it was a shock to the system. The sheer amount of life, the casual thrum of a civilization that had moved on, was an insult. Freighters lumbered towards docking bays, their hulls emblazoned with corporate logos. Sleek private yachts cut through the traffic with arrogant grace. Patrol ships, bearing the same Coalition insignia as Admiral Vorlag's Dreadnought, moved with a lazy, confident authority. This was the world that had been saved by our sacrifice. A world that had forgotten us so completely that our memory was nothing more than a historical footnote and a quarantined sector of space. We docked in the lower rings, the station's grimy underbelly, where regulations were suggestions and anonymity was a commodity. Lena had already worked her magic, creating a false transponder code for the Wraith that identified us as an independent salvage vessel, the Stray Dog, with a cargo of inert scrap metal. It was a flimsy disguise, but in a place this busy, flimsy was usually good enough. The moment the airlock hissed open, the station assaulted our senses. The air was thick with the smells of ozone, spicy alien food, and unwashed bodies. The noise was a constant, deafening roar of 100 different languages, blaring advertisements, and the clang of machinery. It was everything the graveyard was not vibrant, chaotic, and alive. And we, in our dark, patched-up fatigues, with the pallor of the void still clinging to our skin, were ghosts walking through a carnival. Our first task was reconnaissance. We couldn't afford a mistake. We split up. I said, my voice low in the noisy docking bay, Anya, Jax, you stick to the main concourse. Get a feel for the security patrols, their routes, their response times. Don't engage anyone. Just be invisible. Anya nodded, pulling the hood of her worn jacket over her head, her face disappearing into shadow. Jack simply grunted, his hand never straying far from the heavy blaster pistol concealed under his coat. Lena, you're with me, I continued. We need to find a public data terminal, something we can slice into without drawing the attention of the station's security AI. We moved into the throng, a current of bodies pulling us along. Lena, small and unassuming, clutched her datapad like a holy text, her eyes scanning everything, absorbing the flow of data from public network nodes. I felt 1,000 alien eyes slide over us, some curious, some indifferent. A human face was a rarity, a relic. Most would assume we were descendants of some long-lost colony, a biological curiosity. No one would ever suspect we were from the fleet. No one would believe the dead could walk. We found a terminal in a dingy, forgotten corner of the lower market, tucked between a stall selling live Klaxian eels and a gambling den reeking of cheap stimulants. While I stood watch, trying to look like a bored bodyguard, Lena went to work. Her connection to the terminal was a whisper, a ghost in the machine. She bypassed the firewalls with an artist's grace, her fingers flying across the pad as she dove deep into the Port Authority's personnel files. It took her less than 20 minutes. An image resolved on her screen, a jowly, self-satisfied-looking Varus official, his 4 eyes blinking lazily at the camera. Zaylen Kor. Got him. Lena breathed. He lives well. Penthouse suite in the spire. The station's luxury ring. Security is private. Contracted through the Viridian Corporation. He makes his rounds in the cargo and customs sector every day between the 3rd and 5th cycles. Predictable. Arrogant. She brought up another file. And he has a weakness. A private ledger. Encrypted. But the digital signatures indicate regular payments to a high-end establishment in the entertainment district called the Gilded Cage. Looks like our portmaster has expensive tastes. The plan was simple, brutal, and had zero margin for error. We wouldn't go after him in his fortified home or during his public rounds. We would use his vice against him. We would take him from the Gilded Cage. Anya and Jax confirmed that security in the entertainment district was surprisingly lax, more focused on breaking up drunken brawls than watching for serious threats. It was the perfect hunting ground. The next day, we moved into position. Anya was our eyes, perched in a darkened maintenance alcove overlooking the entrance to the club, her sniper rifle broken down in a carry case. Jax was a shadow in the alleyway behind the club, a silent guardian of our only escape route. Lena was our ghost, patched into the club's internal systems from a nearby comms booster, ready to kill the lights and loop the security feeds. I was the bait. I walked through the doors of the Gilded Cage and was hit by a wave of cloying perfume and saccharine music. The place was a monument to decadence, all plush red velvet, shimmering gold accents, and holographic dancers twisting in midair. The patrons were the elite of Port Noctis corporate executives, crime lords, and corrupt officials, all rubbing shoulders and making deals over brightly colored, bubbling drinks. I found a secluded booth in the back, ordered a drink I had no intention of touching, and waited. An hour later, Zaylen Kor waddled in, flanked by 2 bored-looking Viridian guards. He was even more unimpressive in person, a creature of soft flesh and shifty eyes. He settled into a private alcove, and soon a server was bringing him a tray of expensive liquors and a data slate for his transactions. This was the moment. I sent the signal. Over my comm. Lena's voice was a calm whisper. Cameras are on a 5-minute loop. Killing the lights in his section. Go. The lights above Kor's alcove flickered and died, plunging his area into darkness. The ambient music stuttered for a second, masking the sound of the guard's startled grunts. That was Jax. I moved fast, a shadow detaching from the wall. Kor looked up, his 4 eyes wide with confusion. "What in the void?" he started to say. Before I was on him, my hand clamped over his mouth. and the cold barrel of my pistol pressed against his soft neck. "Make a sound, and your career won't be the only thing that ends tonight." I hissed into his auditory sensor. Terror washed over him, so potent I could almost smell it. I dragged him backwards, through a service door that Lena had unlocked, and into the waiting darkness of the alley. Jax had the two guards slumped against a dumpster, unconscious, but alive. We weren't here to kill indiscriminately. Our vengeance had a name, and it was Zalen Kor. We hauled the terrified Varys into the back of a stolen cargo speeder and were gone before the lights in the club even came back on. Back in the sterile confines of the Wraith's cargo bay, the reality of what we had done began to set in. We had crossed a line. We were no longer just fugitives. We were kidnappers, aggressors. But as I looked at Kor, who was now bound to a chair and trembling uncontrollably, I felt no regret, only a cold, satisfying focus. "Do you know who I am?" I began, my voice quiet. Kor shook his head frantically, stammering about ransoms and powerful friends. I leaned in close, my face inches from his. 10 years ago, you signed a document, Coalition Form 734 Alpha, the official report on the Battle of the Cygnus Gate. It listed the entire human fleet, over 10 million souls, as acceptable casualties in a strategic sacrifice. It sealed the sector and declared our species extinct. Do you remember signing that? Zalen, the color drained from his gray skin. His 4 eyes widened in horrified recognition. He knew. He was looking at a ghost. It's not possible," he whispered, his voice trembling. "You're all dead." I smiled, a tight, mirthless expression. Reports of our death were greatly exaggerated. "Now, you're going to tell me everything. I want to know about Admiral Kane's escape flotilla, Project Chimera. I want the names of everyone involved in the cover-up. I want the location of the secret rendezvous point they were heading to. You were the logistics officer. You buried the supply requisitions, the flight plans, the personnel transfers. You know where the bodies are buried. Or in this case, where they aren't." He started to blubber, denying everything, but his fear betrayed him. Jax stepped forward, cracking his knuckles, and the Varys' resolve crumbled completely. The story spilled out of him in a torrent of pathetic, self-serving excuses. He was just a bureaucrat, he said, following orders from the highest levels of the Coalition and the human high command. He confirmed it all: the deliberate sacrifice, the escape of a hand-picked group of human elites, the systematic erasure of any evidence. They called it the Ark Fleet. He sobbed. Led by Admiral Kane himself, they were headed for a deep space outpost in the Serpent's Nebula, a hidden research station called Elysium. It was their new Eden, a place to rebuild humanity in their own image. I don't know anything more. I swear that's all they told me. He had given us our next destination. He had given us a name for our new Eden, Elysium. I looked at my crew. Anya's face was stone. Lena's was streaked with fresh tears, but her eyes were hard as diamonds. Jax was a statue of impending violence. Our path was clear. I turned back to Kor, who was now looking at me with a pathetic sliver of hope, as if his cooperation might buy him his life. "You helped them bury 10 million people under a lie," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "You got to live in a penthouse while my people floated in a frozen graveyard." I picked up a datapad from a nearby crate. On the screen was the ledger from the Gilded Cage, detailing all of his illegal dealings, bribes, and corruptions. "You won't die tonight, Zalen," I told him, a cold sense of justice washing over me. That would be too easy. You're going to live with what you've done. I hit the send button, broadcasting his entire criminal history to the Port Noctis security network and every major news outlet on the station. But the life you knew is over. They'll strip you of everything. Your title, your wealth, your comfortable existence. You'll be a pariah. And every day for the rest of your miserable life, you will remember that the ghosts you helped create came back to haunt you. We left him there, bound in the cargo bay of our abandoned speeder, and made our way back to the Wraith as we lifted off from Port Noctis, leaving a storm of scandal and ruin in our wake. A new feeling settled over me. We had drawn first blood. We had turned their own secrets against them. We were no longer just the ghosts of Cygnus. We were the Reckoning. And our hunt for Elysium had just begun. The Serpent's Nebula was a place charts were drawn to avoid, a chaotic, swirling expanse of ionized hydrogen and dense cosmic dust clouds. It was a navigator's nightmare and a censor's graveyard. It was also the perfect place to hide something you never wanted to be found. As the Wraith plunged into the nebula's outer veil, the universe outside our viewport dissolved into an impressionistic smear of violent reds and deep, abyssal purples. The ship groaned in protest as charged particles peppered its hull, and our long-range sensors became utterly useless, dissolving into a blizzard of white noise. We were flying blind, relying on Anya's skill and the last known coordinates Zaylan Kor had given us. For 3 weeks, we were ghosts in a storm. The isolation was more profound, more absolute than even the graveyard had been. At least there, we had the silent company of our dead. Here, there was nothing but the howl of the stellar wind and the oppressive, claustrophobic feeling of being utterly, cosmically lost. The rage that had fueled us since the vigilance had settled into a low, simmering coal in our bellies. The hunt was no longer a fresh, raw wound. It was a chronic ache, a part of us. Lena spent every waking moment trying to cut through the nebula's interference, running complex algorithms to filter the signal from the noise, searching for any telltale energy signature, any faint transmission that might betray the location of a hidden, self-sustaining colony. She was hunting for the electronic ghost of Elysium. Jax became even more withdrawn, a silent monolith who would stand for hours at the viewport, watching the cosmic chaos swirl by as if he were trying to memorize its patterns. I found him one cycle in the mess hall, sharpening his combat knife with a whetstone, the rhythmic scrape, scrape, scrape the only sound. "You're quiet," I said, stating the obvious. He didn't look up. Nothing to say. "Are you with us?" "Jax." "All the way?" I needed to know. The path ahead was only going to get darker. He paused, setting the knife down and looking at it as if it held the answer. "On my home world," he began, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that was startling after weeks of silence. "When a predator grows sick and begins to hunt its own pack, you don't reason with it. You don't try to cure it. You track it to its den, and you cut out its heart." He picked up the knife and resumed his work. That was all the answer I needed. Our breakthrough came, as they often do, not with a bang, but with a whisper. Lena, her face pale and drawn from exhaustion, called me to her station. Her screen was a mess of cascading code and fractured data streams, but in the center was a single, repeating signal, faint but persistent. "I found it," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of fatigue and triumph. "It's a navigational beacon, but it's not standard coalition tech. It's cycling through a quantum encrypted frequency, piggybacking on the background radiation of a pulsar deep inside the nebula. It's designed to be invisible unless you know exactly what you're looking for. It's a breadcrumb. Kyle, leading home. She cross-referenced the signal's origin point with the fragmented star charts we'd recovered from the Vigilance. There, nestled in a small, gravitationally stable pocket within the densest part of the nebula, was an uncharted M-class planetoid, a world that, according to official records, did not exist. Elysium. Adrenaline, sharp and electric, cut through the weariness. This was it. The den. We altered our course, following the invisible thread of Lena's discovery deeper into the storm. As we drew closer, the nebula's interference lessened, as if we had passed through a curtain. The energy readings became clearer, sharper. We detected the faint but unmistakable traces of a sophisticated power grid, atmospheric processors, and a low-orbit defensive perimeter. They were here. They were real. Anya brought the Wraith in low, using a small, barren moon as cover. From our hiding place, we looked upon Elysium. It was a testament to the arrogance and ingenuity of Admiral Kane. A single, massive biomega arcology sprawled across the planetoid's largest continent, a city of gleaming white towers and lush, enclosed green spaces, all shielded from the harsh nebula by a shimmering energy dome. It was an impossible jewel hidden in the heart of chaos, a perfect self-contained world built on a foundation of 10 million corpses. Our approach had not gone unnoticed. It clipped. Professional voice crackled over our comms, cutting through the standard hailing frequencies. Unidentified vessel. You have entered a restricted military zone. Identify yourself immediately, or you will be fired upon. It was a human voice, crisp with authority. I looked at my crew. Their faces were hard, set, their eyes burning with the same cold fire I felt in my own chest. We had come too far to be stopped by a warning. Lena, can you crack their local comms network? I asked. My voice low. Can you make them hear us? She gave a tight, determined nod. Give me a minute. While Lena worked, I formulated a new plan. A direct assault was suicide. The Wraith was a scavenger ship, not a warship. It wouldn't last 30 seconds against a dedicated military defense system. We couldn't fight them on their terms. So, we would fight them on ours. We would use the one weapon they couldn't defend against the truth. They don't know who we are, I said, pacing the small bridge. They think we're a lost freighter or a pirate crew. They're arrogant, secure in their hidden paradise. They've spent 10 years believing a lie. We're going to tear that lie apart, not from the outside, but from the inside. The plan was audacious, bordering on insane. Anya would take the Wraith back into the nebula's interference, using the storm as cover to approach from a different vector. She would aim for one of the unshielded geothermal vents on the planetoid's dark side, a potential back door that Lena had identified from the energy grid schematics. Jax and I would take the Revenant, our small one-man boarding pod, and make a hard burn directly for the station. We would be the diversion, the loud, obvious threat. While all their attention was on us, Anya and Lena would attempt to infiltrate the city's core systems through the geothermal network. I'm in. Lena's voice crackled, cutting through the tension. I have access to their colony-wide broadcast system. Audio only, for now. What do you want to say? I took a deep breath, the ghosts of the Vigilance standing at my shoulder. I keyed the comm. This is Survivor's Guilt. Calling Elysium. Is Admiral Kane home? The response from Elysium was a sudden, violent escalation. The calm, professional voice was gone, replaced by the blare of alarms and a flurry of encrypted chatter. We had hit a nerve. We had used a name they thought long buried. A squadron of sleek, black interceptors launched from the city, their engines flaring to life as they screamed towards our position. This was our cue. "Anya, go!" I yelled. The wraith peeled away, disappearing back into the swirling purple clouds of the nebula. Jax and I strapped ourselves into the cramped confines of the Revenant. It was little more than an engine strapped to a cockpit, with a thin layer of ablative armor and a prayer. I launched the pod, pushing its primitive engine to the absolute limit, sending us hurtling directly towards the incoming fighters and the gleaming city beyond. We were a gnat challenging a pack of wolves. The dogfight was a blur of chaos and desperation. The Elysian fighters were faster, more agile, and infinitely better armed. Laser fire stitched across the void around us, and I threw the Revenant into a series of gut-wrenching evasive maneuvers that sent Jax slamming against his restraints. Our goal wasn't to win, it was to survive long enough to be a convincing distraction. While they swarmed us, I opened a wideband broadcast, overriding their military channels with a raw, unfiltered signal. "People of Elysium," I began, my voice strained against the G-forces. "My name is Kale. I was an ensign on the frigate Orion at the Battle of the Cygnus Gate. Admiral Kane told you we died holding the line. He told you we sacrificed ourselves for the future of humanity." A proximity alarm shrieked as a fighter flashed past our cockpit, close enough for me to see the pilot's helmeted face. "He lied!" I snarled, wrenching the controls. "He ordered our fleet to its death. He abandoned 10 million soldiers, sailors, and civilians to die, so he and his chosen few could escape. Your perfect world is built on a mass grave." On my tactical display, I saw Anya's signal. The wraith was making its approach on the dark side. Undetected, the diversion was working. We just had to hold on. Suddenly, a new voice cut through my broadcast, overriding my signal with sheer power. It was an older voice, calm, commanding, and dripping with condescending authority. It was a voice I recognized from the Vigilance's final log. It was Admiral Valerius Kane. "This is Admiral Kane," he announced, his voice booming across the comms network of his entire city. "The vessel attacking us is a pirate, a scavenger who has stumbled upon our location by chance. He is a madman, twisting the memory of our fallen heroes for his own purposes. Do not listen to his lies. Our forces will deal with this intruder. He was good. He was painting me as a lunatic, a grave robber, but I had an ace he didn't know about. Lena. Now, I screamed into my comm. A moment later, a new sound flooded the Elysian comms network. It wasn't my voice. It was the clear, crisp, and utterly betrayed voice of Captain Eva Rustova, taken directly from the Vigilance's black box. "He's leaving us," her ghostly voice echoed across the perfect city. "Kane, he's leaving us all to die." The effect was instantaneous. The Elysian fighter pilots, who had been pressing their attack with cold efficiency, suddenly became hesitant. Their tight formation wavered on the ground. I could only imagine the confusion, the seeds of doubt being planted in the minds of a population that had been fed a single, heroic narrative for a decade. We had fired our shot. Now it was time to get out. I pushed the Revenant into a desperate, tumbling dive towards the planetoid surface, aiming for the rugged and unshielded canyons outside the city dome. An energy bolt caught our port stabilizer, sending us into an uncontrolled spin. Jax grunted as the pod shook itself apart around us. "Brace for impact," I yelled as the red, rocky ground rushed up to meet us. The crash was a symphony of destruction, of tearing metal and shattering transparent steel. My world exploded into a starburst of pain and then went black. I didn't know if Anya and Lena had made it. I didn't know if the people of Elysium had believed Rostova's ghost. All I knew was that we had torn the mask from their paradise, and now we were stranded on the shores of their private Eden, with the serpent himself now fully aware of our presence. The hunt had just become a war. The first thing I tasted was blood and grit. Consciousness returned not as a gentle dawn, but as a violent shove back into a world of pain. My head throbbed in rhythm with the shrieking of a dozen alarms, and the coppery tang in my mouth was a stark reminder of the crash. I forced my eyes open, the dim red light of the emergency strobes painting a scene of total devastation. The Revenant was a mangled coffin, its cockpit shattered and bent. The beautiful, chaotic expanse of the Serpent's Nebula replaced by a jagged tear in the hull showing a blood-red, alien sky. Jax was groaning beside me, his armored form wedged against a buckled console. A deep gash ran across his forehead, but he was moving, which was more than I had dared to hope for. "Status," he grunted, his voice tight with pain as he unbuckled himself and began a pained systems check of his own body. "Broken," I coughed, spitting out a loose tooth, but breathing. We were alive, but we were stranded, exposed, and deep in enemy territory. The alarms from our wrecked pod were a dinner bell, and we knew the wolves would be coming. We salvaged what we could: 2 pulse rifles, a med kit, a handful of power cells, and a portable comms unit. Our long-range connection to the Wraith was gone, severed by the crash and the planetoid's thick atmosphere. We were alone. "Anya and Lena are on their own now," Jax stated, his gaze fixed on the gleaming dome of the city, a distant, mocking promise of civilization on the horizon. "We need to assume they're moving on the objective. Our job is to draw as much fire as we can, give them the time they need." He was right. We were no longer the hunters, we were the lure. Our survival was now secondary to the mission's success. We abandoned the wreck and scrambled into the labyrinthine canyons that crisscrossed the planetoid's surface. The landscape was brutal and alien, all sharp, iron-rich rock and rust-colored dust that clung to our clothes and filled our lungs. The air was thin and cold, and the weak, distant light of the nebula's core stars did little to chase away the deep, menacing shadows. We moved for hours, putting as much distance as possible between ourselves and the crash site. Every step an agony. My ribs felt like a bag of broken glass, and Jax was moving with a stiff, painful limp. We were 2 broken soldiers in a hostile world, haunted by the ghost of a dead fleet. Back inside the pristine, white corridors of Elysium, a different kind of war was being fought. The broadcast of Captain Rostova's last words had shattered the city's carefully constructed peace. It was a virus in their utopia, spreading doubt and fear through the population. Admiral Kane had immediately declared martial law. His elite guard, the Praetorians, storming through the city's plazas to quell the pockets of unrest that had begun to form. He appeared on every holoscreen, his face a mask of calm, paternal authority, assuring his people that the recording was a fabrication, a clever forgery by their enemies, designed to sow discord. He was a master of control, and, for many, His words were enough, but not for everyone. In the city's lower levels, among the engineers, the technicians, and the descendants of the non-military personnel who had been brought to Elysium, the seeds of doubt had taken root. They had heard the raw, desperate grief in Rostova's voice, and it resonated with a truth that Kane's polished speeches could not erase. Anya and Lena had made it. The Wraith had slipped through the geothermal vent network, its hull plate scraping against the narrow rock tunnels, and emerged into a massive subterranean cavern that housed the city's primary heat exchange. They were inside, undetected. While Anya secured the ship and set up a defensible perimeter, Lena, with her datapad and a set of custom-built slicer tools, became a phantom in Elysium's central nervous system. She didn't launch a frontal assault on their data core. That would have been suicide. Instead, she was subtle. A whisper in the code. She found the city's archives, the unedited personnel files, the maintenance logs for the Arc fleet, and she began to leak them, not in a massive data dump, but in a slow, steady drip, feeding them into the public forums and private message boards of the city's lower-level citizens. A ship's manifest that showed 100 empty berths on a full evacuation transport. A quartermaster's report that detailed the rerouting of medical supplies away from the front lines and towards Kane's private fleet. Small inconsistencies, tiny cracks in the official story. Each one another piece of evidence that the madman in the crashed pod might have been telling the truth. Meanwhile, Jax and I were being hunted. We saw the search parties from a high ridge, sleek grav skimmers sweeping through the canyons, their searchlights cutting through the dust-filled air. Praetorian guards, clad in gleaming black and silver armor, rappelled down to the canyon floor, their movements precise and lethal. They were Kane's personal enforcers, genetically enhanced and fanatically loyal. They were not the kind of soldiers you could reason with. "They're moving in a grid pattern," Jax observed, his voice a low whisper beside me. "Systematic. They'll find us within the next cycle." "Then we can't let them," I replied, checking the charge on my pulse rifle. "We need to stop being the prey." We found a narrow pass, a natural bottleneck in the canyon that was perfect for an ambush. We rigged our remaining power cells to a loose rock formation above the pass, creating a makeshift explosive trap. Then we settled in, backs against the cold rock, and waited. The first two Praetorians came through the pass with arrogant confidence, their rifles held at a low ready. They moved like apex predators, certain of their superiority. That was their mistake. I detonated the charge. The explosion was deafening, a roar of sound and fury that sent a cascade of rock and debris crashing down into the pass. One of the guards was crushed instantly. The other, caught in the rock slide, was pinned, his leg shattered. We were on him before he could raise an alarm, Jax disarming him with brutal efficiency while I silenced him with the butt of my rifle. We stripped them of their armor, their weapons, and most importantly, their communications gear. The black and silver plates of the Praetorian armor felt alien against my skin, a costume for a part I was not born to play, but it was our only chance. With their comms unit, we could hear their chatter. They were reporting our trap as a natural rock slide, their arrogance making them blind to the truth. They believed they were hunting desperate, disorganized survivors. They had no idea they were hunting ghosts who knew their playbook. Lena's information war was escalating. She had found the jackpot Kane's personal logs, the unedited, unredacted records of his decisions during the final hours of the battle. They were a chilling testament to his cold, ruthless pragmatism. He spoke of the fleet not as people, but as assets and acceptable losses. He outlined his vision for a new humanity, one purged of the sentimental weaknesses that he believed had held the species back. It was a eugenicist's dream, a tyrant's manifesto. Lena broadcast the logs, raw and unfiltered, directly into the city's maintenance and engineering channels, the places where the people who kept Elysium running would hear it first. The effect was seismic. Strikes began in the water reclamation plants. Sabotage crippled the atmospheric processors in the upper-class residential spires, the city's blue-collar workers, the ones whose parents and grandparents were not the scientists and philosophers Kane had saved, but the grunts who kept his paradise functioning were turning against him. The perfect, gleaming city was starting to choke on its own lies. Kane was losing control, and he knew it. In a desperate, furious move, he did something we hadn't anticipated. He activated the Chimera Protocol. It was a name we'd seen in the Vigilance's logs, but we didn't know what it meant. We found out soon enough. Alarms blared across the Praetorian comms network. Jax and I, now disguised in their stolen armor, listened in horror. Kane was unleashing his final solution. The Chimeras were his secret project, the dark heart of Elysium. They were the children and grandchildren of the Ark Fleet's elite, but they had been altered, subjected to a brutal regimen of genetic engineering and psychological conditioning. They were living weapons, bred for absolute loyalty and superhuman combat abilities. They were the future of his purged humanity, and he was now unleashing them on his own people to crush the burgeoning rebellion. We saw them from our hiding place in the rocks. They descended into the city's lower levels in armored transports, not in Praetorian silver and black, but in stark, sterile white. They moved with a fluid, terrifying grace, their faces hidden behind mirrored visors. They were not soldiers. They were exterminators. They met the striking workers not with stun batons and riot shields, but with pulse rifles and plasma grenades. The rebellion was turning into a massacre. He's slaughtering them. Jax breathed, his voice raw with disbelief. His own people. I knew then that our mission had changed. This was no longer just about vengeance for the dead of the Cygnus graveyard. It was about saving the living of Elysium from the monster who had created them. Anya, Lena, do you read me? I broadcast on our private, encrypted channel, praying they could hear us. Kane is purging the city. We have to stop him. The objective is no longer data. The objective is Kane's command tower. We're going in. There was a burst of static. And then Anya's voice, tight and furious, came through. We read you. Kyle, the people here, they're fighting back. But they're being slaughtered. What's the plan? We're the plan, I said, looking at Jax, whose face was a mask of cold fury under the stolen helmet. We were disguised as the enemy. We had their weapons, their comms, and their access codes. The Praetorians are focused on the purge in the lower levels. They'll be stretched thin. We're going to walk right through their front door. We're going to the top of that tower, and we're going to cut the head off the snake. We began to move, two ghosts in the armor of our enemies, walking out of the canyons and towards the city of lies, leaving the dust and the silence of the wilderness behind us. We were no longer just a reckoning for the past. We were the only hope for a future we had never imagined we would be fighting for. The final battle for the soul of humanity was about to begin. The walk to the city gates was a surreal journey through the belly of the beast. Dressed in the stark, imposing armor of the Praetorian Guard, Jax and I moved with a confidence we did not feel. Our stolen pulse rifles held at a practiced ready. The chaos of the canyons was behind us. Ahead lay the cold, ordered geometry of Elysium. Grav transports carrying Chimera shock troops screamed overhead, heading towards the lower levels where the sounds of conflict, muffled by distance and the energy dome, echoed like a discordant symphony. We fell in with a squad of Praetorians returning from a patrol, mimicking their stiff, economical movements, our helmeted faces giving away nothing. They accepted our presence without question. Their comms discipline too rigid to allow for casual chatter. They were cogs in a machine, and we, for now, were indistinguishable from them. As we passed through the shimmering energy field of the main gate, the sanitized air of the city filled my helmet, a stark contrast to the raw, dusty air of the wilds. The upper levels of Elysium were unnervingly calm, a sterile paradise untouched by the violence unfolding below. Well-dressed citizens with haunted eyes hurried along pristine walkways, their faces pale with a fear they dared not speak aloud. Hollow screens, which once showed idyllic landscapes, now broadcasted Kane's face on a loop. His calm, reassuring voice a monstrous lie laid over the screams of his own people. Our target was the spire, a needle of white plasteel and shimmering glass that pierced the top of the dome, the seat of Kane's power. It was the heart of the city, and we were a virus heading straight for it. Anya and Lena were already in motion. "We're moving." Anya's voice crackled in our private comm, a lifeline in the suffocating silence of our deception. Lena is using the chaos to her advantage. She's triggered a series of cascading system failures throughout the lower-level grid power fluctuations, comms blackouts, atmospheric faults. It's pulling Chimera and Praetorian units away from the central sectors. She's creating a path for us. I could hear the thud of distant explosions in the background of her transmission. And us. We're providing a more direct distraction, she said, a grim smile in her voice. The Wraith may not be a warship, but it's a damn good battering ram. Lena's digital sabotage was the scalpel. Anya was the hammer. We saw it moments later. The Wraith, our ugly, beautiful Frankenstein of a ship, rose from the subterranean depths, its scarred hull a brutalist monument against the gleaming white architecture. It was trailing smoke and venting plasma, but it was flying. Anya wasn't attacking the city, she was attacking its symbols. She brought the ship screaming over the heads of the elite in the upper plazas, its weapons batteries firing not at people, but at the towering statues of Admiral Kane, at the pristine facades of the High Command's administrative buildings. It was an act of pure, defiant vandalism, a visceral assault on the symbols of their power that was more shocking to the sheltered elite than any loss of life. The city's automated defense turrets, finally tracking a clear target, opened fire, and the sky lit up with a storm of laser fire. Anya was drawing the full attention of Elysium's defenses, buying us the precious moments we needed. We reached the base of the spire, a grand, cathedral-like lobby patrolled by the most elite of the Praetorian Guard. There was no way to bluff our way through. This was where the deception ended and the battle began. I caught Jax's eye through our visors, a silent, shared understanding passing between us. I raised my rifle and shot the lobby's ranking officer in the chest. For a frozen second, there was only shock. Then the lobby erupted into a maelstrom of pulse rifle fire. We were brutally efficient, our movements honed by a decade of survival. We weren't soldiers following doctrine. We were predators, using cover and aggression with a ferocity that caught the disciplined Praetorians off guard. We fought our way to the central elevator, the bodies of Kane's finest left in our wake, our black and silver armor now scarred and pitted by enemy fire, as the elevator doors hissed shut, sealing us in. I knew there was no turning back. The ride to the top was a tense, silent ascent through the heart of our enemy's power. We were two ghosts in a stolen machine, rising to meet the man who had made us. The doors opened onto the pinnacle of the spire, the Admiral's command center. It was a vast, just circular room with a panoramic view of the entire city and the swirling nebula beyond. And there, standing before the vast window like a king surveying his domain, was Admiral Valerius Kane. He was older than in the vids, his face lined with the stress of maintaining a perfect world, but his eyes held the same unwavering, fanatical certainty. He was not alone. Flanking him were two chimeras, their white armor immaculate, their mirrored helmets betraying no emotion. They were Kane's ultimate creation, his perfect, obedient children. "The ghosts of Ignis," Kane said, his voice calm, betraying no surprise. "I must admit, I'm impressed. To survive for so long, to come so far, a testament to the very resilience I sought to preserve." "You preserved nothing," I snarled, raising my rifle. "You curated a gene pool and called it a civilization. You murdered 10 million people to build this museum." Kane smiled, a thin, condescending expression. "Sacrifice is the engine of progress. Ensign, a concept your sentimental generation could never grasp. I save the essence of humanity, its intellect, its ambition, its potential. I cut away the diseased limb to save the body." "We were the body," I roared, the rage of a decade finally finding its voice. Jack said nothing, but moved to my flank, his rifle a steady, unwavering extension of his will. The two chimeras shifted, their movements fluid and impossibly fast, positioning themselves between us and Kane. "You see only the past," Kane continued, gesturing to the city below, where plumes of smoke now rose from the lower levels. "I was building the future, a humanity free from the petty conflicts and emotional weaknesses that almost led us to extinction. A stronger, purer, more disciplined species. The chimeras are the first of that new breed." As he spoke, something flickered on the main holoscreen behind him. It was Lena. Her face, pale and determined, appeared for a split second, followed by a torrent of data. She had done it. She had breached the Spire's core systems. A new voice, cold and synthetic, filled the room, overriding Kane's broadcast. It was the unedited audio from Kane's personal logs, the chilling record of his monstrous pragmatism, now being broadcast not just to the rebels, but to every Praetorian, every chimera, every citizen in Elysium. The fleet is an acceptable loss. Their sacrifice is strategically necessary. Purge the sentimental weakness. The two chimeras flinched. It was a small, almost imperceptible reaction, but it was there. For the first time, they were hearing the unvarnished truth of their creator. They were hearing not that they were the future, but that they were the product of a massacre. Lies. Fabrications. Kane bellowed, his composure finally cracking. Destroy them! The chimeras hesitated for a fraction of a second. That was all we needed. Jax and I opened fire, not at the chimeras, but at the reinforced window behind Kane. The pulse bolts spiderwebbed across the transparent steel, the structural integrity alarms shrieking. The chimeras, their conditioning warring with the truth they had just heard, finally reacted, their own weapons firing with blinding speed. The firefight was short and savage. They were faster, stronger, better. But we were fighting with the weight of 10 million souls at our back. Jax went down, a plasma bolt searing through his stolen armor, but he took one of the chimeras with him. A final, defiant act of will. I was hit, my leg buckling under a wave of fire. But as I fell, I emptied my rifle's charge into the last chimera, its white armor flowering red. I was left alone, bleeding on the floor, my rifle empty, facing Admiral Kane. He held a small, elegant energy pistol, his hand trembling with fury. Behind him, the great window groaned, cracks spreading like lightning. It's over. Kane. I gasped, trying to push myself up. You've lost. Your perfect city is tearing itself apart. Your own children have heard your truth. It is not over, he hissed, his face contorted in a mask of righteous rage. I am humanity's future. I am its only hope. He raised his pistol to fire, but before he could, the last chimera, the one I had shot, stirred. It rose to one knee, its mirrored helmet turning from me to its creator. Through the comms, I heard a fractured, synthesized voice, the first words it had ever spoken. We are not your hope. With its last ounce of strength, the chimera raised its weapon and shot Admiral Kane in the back. The Admiral stumbled forward, a look of utter shock on his face, before collapsing against the fracturing window. With a final explosive groan, the transparent steel gave way, sucking him out into the violent, swirling chaos of the nebula he had tried to conquer. Silence descended upon the command center, broken only by the whistling of the wind through the shattered window. It was over. I lay there, bleeding and broken, as the sounds of fighting from the city below began to fade, replaced by a confused, tentative quiet. In the days that followed, Elysium fractured. The truth, once revealed, could not be unlearned. The Praetorian Guard surrendered, their loyalty shattered. The chimeras, leaderless and lost, retreated into seclusion, questioning the very nature of their existence. The citizens, both the elite and the workers, were left to pick up the pieces of their broken paradise, forced to confront the lie they had been living. Anya landed the battered wraith in the main plaza, a symbol of rebellion and a testament to survival. Lena, our ghost in the machine, became a reluctant leader, helping the city's engineers restore basic services and establish a council of representatives. Jax survived. Barely. They rebuilt his shattered body with Elysian cybernetics, making him more machine than man. But the fire in his eyes remained. And me, I was no longer a hunter. The rage that had driven me was gone, replaced by a vast, aching emptiness. Our vengeance was complete, but it had not brought back the dead. We had not reclaimed our honor. We had simply exposed its theft. Standing on the bridge of the repaired wraith weeks later, I looked out at the stars. No longer a graveyard, but a vast, unknown territory. We were 4 survivors, the last remnants of a forgotten fleet who had torn down one flawed utopia and were now faced with the terrifying, uncertain task of building something new from the ashes. We were not heroes. We were not saviors. We were just the consequences. And as we turned the Wraith and set a course away from the Serpent's Nebula, back into the galaxy that had forgotten us, I knew one thing for certain. The story of humanity was not over. It had just been given a new, painful, and perhaps hopeful beginning.